3年前と同じような猛暑となった場合でも、全国では電力の余力が 6.3% 確保できると試算しています。
Picture this. It's April 2020. You're sat in your garden and it's 25 degrees. You decide to sit in your lounge and rest from the heat. There are currently a set of rules imposed by the government which prevent you from going outside. These prevent you from catching a virus called COVID-19. This is your lived reality. You decide to turn on the news.
But many also call this heatwave unprecedented.
Afternoon, and 7 ambulances are suddenly stacked up outside.
Approximately 129 Americans are testing positive for COVID-19 every minute here in the US.
These news clips you've just seen are based on the same factual information as your lived reality, but they've been altered, changed for a different purpose. One of the key topics of media studies is the idea of representation. The idea that events, issues, topics, and individuals are literally represented to suit the producer's purpose. Therefore, what you see in the media may be based on the same factual information as your lived reality, but it's actually a constructed version of it, sometimes called a mediated reality. Consider the 3 news clips. They share the same factual information as your lived experience, heat, and COVID-19. Where they differ is in the representation of these events. You could argue all 3 are sensationalized versions of reality. Their representation of the events is intended to provoke public interest and outcry. Whether that's the dust and hard lighting in the first clip to sell the heatwave, the downbeat, non-diegetic music that underscores the clip from the hospital,
and 7 ambulances are suddenly stacked up outside.
Or even the emphasis of the words
every minute
to highlight the COVID-related deaths in the US. These news stories are designed to provoke their audiences. These stories are sensationalized, but also pessimistic versions of reality. Remember the famous quote, "Bad news sells"? This is something researchers call negativity bias, where we place more weight on negative rather than positive news. Consider this when you see overly negative versions of reality in the news in the future. A good way to remember what versions of reality are is to think about the origins of the word media. The word media is a plural form of the Latin word medium, meaning middle ground or intermediate. Its usage as a word to describe newspapers, radio, and other sources of information likely derives from the term mass media, which was a technical term used in the advertising industry from the 1920s on. The media, whether that is TV, newspapers, music videos, etc., acts as a middle ground between us and reality. This places it in a very privileged position. In the news, real events are taken and altered. However, it's important to consider versions of reality for non-fiction texts as well. Quite often, these are imagined or fantastical versions of reality. Take Riptide by Vance as an example. The version of reality in this video is fantastical. It shows the singer's anxieties about losing a glamorous girlfriend. This glamour is represented through her clothing, makeup, and the line comparing her to Michelle Pfeiffer. On the other hand, the singer's anxiety is represented through the dark lighting, horror-related imagery, such as hands being dragged under a bed, and the gradual smearing of the aforementioned makeup across the female singer's face. When combined, these representations convey an anxious and uncertain version of reality, but also an imagined one. So rather than being based off of real events like news media, fictional texts like music videos and films often portray a fantastical reality that the media text then helps to bring to life.
This lucky baby will sleep quietly through the night. Yes, no matter how high the temperature goes outdoors, this baby's RCA air conditioner will keep his room filled with cool, dry, fresh air and keep that room so comfortable and quiet he'll never need a middle-of-the-night lullaby.
I'll get it, Mom. Why did they ever invent the telephone? Teenagers like Sally just live on the phone these days. I know. And on the floor. Just look at that position, will you? Can you imagine how dirty her shirts get? But I don't worry about it anymore, now that New Tide's here. New Tide? It's got something they call reserve cleaning power in it.
Let's look at one more example, the Tide advertisement. This advert represents an idyllic 1950s suburban reality. This is demonstrated through the representation of the perfect 50s housewife and the use of modern domestic appliances predominantly available to the middle classes. When considering the reality that these representations are based off, we have to consider that although life was like this to some extent, these kinds of adverts were created mainly by men who had a preconceived notion of a woman's role in society. Therefore, in this case, you could argue that the versions of reality represented in the advert are based on real life and also the imagined reality the text's producers wanted to convey. Now, you could argue differently for these texts. Vance Joy's relationship when he wrote Riptide might have been filled with anxieties. However, the main thing is to be able to justify the points you are making with strong examples and explain your ideas in detail. To summarise, the media is a middle ground, a way of adapting reality and presenting it in an altered way. It is not reality itself. Versions of reality questions are summaries of the representations within the specified media text. Consider whether the media text is presenting a version of the truth or an imagined reality. This will help frame the rest of your writing. Consider why reality has been presented, altered, or constructed in this way. What do the producers of the text stand to gain? Perhaps for Riptide, a fantastical version of reality with no clear meaning was intended to generate debate and buzz, with the purpose of getting as many views as possible.